Jillian Michaels, doubles down on the mention of black degeneracy. Here it is.
He's not whitewashing slavery. So he's not? He's not. No, okay. He's not. And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you look at slavery, let's talk about the fact.
I mean, slavery in America was.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave owners.
who was the first race to try to end slavery?
Wait a second.
Well, what's controversial?
I'm very surprised.
This is an extraordinary exercise in historical revisionism.
I'm really surprised.
Do you realize that?
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and who was not.
What I'm trying to tell you is that
in the context of American history, in the context of American history, what are you saying is incorrect by saying that it was white people oppressing black people?
Every single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad. And it's totally partisan.
We don't, first of all, we don't have time to litigate all of this.
Of course we don't, because then you're going to lose the argument. And if everything is racialized, just like you're trying to do to me now.
Excuse me.
That's a reminder of the first time we talked about this, provided the facts, and obviously, Ms. Michaels, you get your facts about racism from Nick Fuentes. Here's the thing. She doubled down. Now, this is after you have the opportunity to listen to folk tell you the truth, and I'm sure somebody on social media reminded you of what the facts actually are. Then the response to the proclamation is made. Here it is.
Less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves.
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race to try to end slavery?
That's an incredibly misleading statistic, because even the Americans who did not own slaves also participated in slavery by benefiting from the economic system of slavery, the political system of slavery, and culturally treating black people as if they were not human. But Jillian didn't acknowledge any of those things, and that, I think, is really what shocked so many of us at the table. Since then, she's doubled down, and she's even said that she had reached out to the White House before coming on the show to ask them about which Smithsonian exhibits they wanted to dispute. She acknowledged that none of the talking points provided by the White House, according to her, had to do with slavery, and yet she still decided to downplay it at the NewsNight table. Fast forward a couple of days later, and now President Trump is actually also downplaying slavery, suggesting that the Smithsonian talks about it too much and overemphasizes the negative of slavery in the context of American history.
That's correct. And it's Abby Phillip. Great job, by the way. I'm very impressed. So, as Michael said, yeah, I called White House. Yep, I called White House, had a conversation. It's called a co-conspiracy, okay? It is a messaging co-conspiracy. It is intentional, it is by design, and they've been doing it for a very long time. Now, Ms. Michaels responds to tell her side of the story at an event. Here it is.
I go on CNN and I get the topics ahead of time. So one of them is that Trump is trying to revise history by asking the Smithsonian to revisit some of their installations.
What does that mean, like art pieces?
I wasn't sure.
Okay.
So I asked the same question. And so I reached out to the comms team at the White House. I said, listen, this is going to come up. Can I ask you, what installations is the administration taking umbrage with? Can you send it to me? So they send me a document, and it's about 50 pages.
Oh my word.
Not one thing in the document, not one installation actually is about slavery. This one woman on the other side immediately goes to Trump is whitewashing slavery. So with unbelievable confidence, knowing what was in there, I'm like, no, he's not. And then when I said, no, he's not, then Abby Phillip and Richey essentially, I guess, made some sort of assumption that I was trying to defend slavery. I'm not quite sure where they got that impression. We constantly talk about white supremacy, but we look the other way with black degeneracy. It begets white hostility that then validates and begets white degeneracy. And it's this impossible cycle. So I turned around to Richey and I was like, do you realize that less than 2% of Americans owned white Americans owned slaves?
Wow.
And the reason I say this is I'm not trying to whitewash slavery. It's because not all white people are the enemy. White people, we really don't understand. We don't. And then black people are like, I don't have to explain this to you. And it's like, maybe you do. Maybe you do. And white people, even though you may not have been responsible for it and you don't want to get another lecture, I think you need to sit there and listen long enough to understand why the pain is still there.
Ma'am, I'm not doing this because I think I'm not doing this because I think there's a lot of hope for you. That's all. Fact checking is part of the role of one who proposes to be a giver of truth. You just read a document from the White House and said, oh, hell, we've been wrong about racism and slavery this whole time. 20%, madam, of southern states had populations that owned slavery. 20%. Damn near 70 to 80% of the enterprise was supported by law, culture, banks, insurance companies. Put up the picture, full mass. I just want you to take a good look at MAGA's choice, okay? So here we go. After comments Michaels made last week on CNN's NewsNight with Abby Phillip, Abby had to do a whole damn new commentary and post it. This was so outrageous. About the breadth of slavery, and blew up across the internet. She now has made claims about Black degeneracy. This happened when Michaels was a speaker at the 10X Ladies Conference. This was in Florida, August 16th, sat down with the conference's host for a conversation. That's when she said this. Now, let's talk about the 2% claim, okay? So contextually, this is what she left out. She left out the part where half of the United States at the time of the Civil War seceded in hopes of preserving slavery. They left because this was such a big deal to them. Regardless of the number of white people who physically owned Black people, a whole lot more white people definitely fought for the rights of those owners of people who happen to be Black. A whole lot more. To own Black folk was a thing. You can't own a human being. It's a ridiculous concept. It's insane to even consider the point. And it somehow makes people forget what slavery is. Once again, slavery is human trafficking, with all of the perils that come with that, including sexual assault, murder, abuse. So human trafficking, sanctioned, legalized, statutorily protected in the United States of America. All right, Confederate states at this point, a whole lot of people owned them. Duke professor Sandy Darty has been quoted as saying that certain Confederate states have populations where 20% of white people owned enslaved Black folk. And in Mississippi and South Carolina, the number hit up to 50%. Hannah Jones, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who created the 1619 Project, who has spent her career reframing American history around the legacy of slavery, posted her rebuttal. She detailed how cotton picked by slave labor represented half of all U.S. exports, fueling the country's banks, factories, and institutions. Quote, without slavery, our nation would be unrecognizable to us, she said. We cannot let them choose the parameters. We cannot let them choose the parameters of the conversation in order to obfuscate the truth. And that is correct. She highlighted how slavery's reach extended far beyond the South. From the cotton Brooks brothers used to tailor its suits to the New York Stock Exchange, which was established in part to finance slavery-dependent enterprises. Enslavement, she emphasized, enriched U.S. president, members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, and many of the men whose faces are stamped on American currency. Quote, all but one of the people on our cash currency engaged in African slavery, she highlighted. Hannah Jones also drew a modern analogy to today's tech giants, noting that while a very small percentage of Americans own companies like Apple, Meta, or Amazon, their influence is inescapable. It's a tiny percentage. I'm doubtful if it's even 1% of Americans who own those companies. She said, and yet no one would credibly argue that social media companies are not ubiquitous across American life. End quote. Her message was clear. Even if only a small minority of white Americans were literally enslavers, the system of slavery was the beating heart of the U.S. economy and a society that sent half of the country to war with the other to protect it. Quote, the times are too serious for us to proliferate a simplistic, unsophisticated, and childish understanding of the history of slavery, she concluded. And I would add to that, corrupt by intention. They're trying to corrupt the historical narrative intentionally. All right, this is thoughts.
Yeah, why is Jillian Michaels talking about any of this? Why is she an authority? Like, how did she get invited to the CNN table? I just watched that documentary about her work on The Biggest Loser, and oh my God, like I never watched that show, but she was terrible. Like she was a terrible person back then, and it seems she still is on something now. And even if less than 2% of white people own slaves, who cares? Okay, like we're always railing against the 1% in modern days, which is less than 2. 1% is less than 2. So currently today, also less than 2% of people, not just of all white people, but of all people, are controlling a handful of multinational corporations and holding lives, all of our lives and our planet hostage for the sake of their own further enrichment. It's a dumb argument because we're very mad about that 1% of people, because that 1% of people, they are very dangerous and they're very damaging. And the things that they are doing to the people and to our planet, they will have long lasting repercussions going forward. So I don't want to give credence to this whole argument that slavery wasn't that bad, which despite what Jillian Michaels may or may not be intending here, is the conversation that has emerged from all of this. I'm not going to entertain that discussion because it's so dumb. If Jillian Michaels needs something like this to be explained to her also, then again, why is she being invited to speak on things that she does not understand? And all of this is actually stemming from the fact that Trump said that the woke Smithsonian, that's what he called it, focuses too much on how bad slavery is, and he does not like that. He's already talking about replacing PBS with PragerU, and that PragerU clip went viral where a cartoon Christopher Columbus was saying that being enslaved was actually better for the natives that he conquered, rather because he could have killed them. So slavery really isn't the worst thing in the world. He was being very, very benevolent to the natives of these places in the Caribbean. And going back to the 2% argument, it doesn't matter. White populations in this country and in other slave owning and slave trading nations are still to this day benefiting from it. There are plenty of old money families whose trust funds are full of slave trade money. I was reading recently actually a Jane Austen book, and these rich Brits were talking about how the son was supposed to take over his father's work and how he was supposed to overlook all of his interests, is what they called it, in the Caribbean. I wonder what those were. The truth is the truth. You can frame it however you want. You can pretend that it didn't happen, or you can pretend that it wasn't as bad as the way it was, or you can even focus on other groups of people who were enslaved, which is an argument that they also try to use. And I also think that one's weird because it, on one hand, acknowledges how horrible slavery is while also trying to downplay the severity of Black slavery. But I will say, even if Trump does get his grips on the Smithsonian, and they've already been caught removing passages from documents that they don't like, and then they're like, oh, we had to put it back. It was just an oversight. So they're already trying to tamper with things. But I feel like even if he does get his way with the Smithsonian, I do feel like things will be corrected once his administration is out of office, just because the people who work at a place like the Smithsonian, that's their job, that's their livelihood, that's the work that they're passionate about, and they're gonna make sure that things get corrected. I hope that's how I feel about that. So I am less worried about that. But this whole conversation and rhetoric, it's just one that we don't need to be having.
Yeah, and it is immature. And for anyone to think that half the country went to war for what only mattered to 2% of white folk in America should really check their historical facts better. All right, we'll bring you updates if she decides to triple down.